If you're into this sort of thing, then you might have noticed on the news yesterday the slightly sad announcement that the BBC have decided after 50 years to axe the popular quiz show, A Question of Sport. Now, if you are into that kind of thing, and you hadn't actually heard that news yet, then I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you here tonight, but it's happening. And I'm not going to lie, I haven't watched A Question of Sport in quite a long time, but if there's one sort of abiding memory I have of it, it was always the what happens next round. So basically it would come up that they would show a clip from any sort of like sporting fixture, and then suddenly it would all be going along as normal and it would pause, and it would be, okay, what happens next? And the teams would be given three sort of like ridiculous options of what might have happened, and one of those things ends up being true, something really stupid. Now, the thing I've got for us tonight is a classic what happens next kind of gag. It's nothing to do with sport. It's actually to do with a nativity play that some friends of mine once went to. I mean, nativity plays are sort of like a classic opportunity for kids to get to have a lot of fun dressing up as characters from the nativity story. And so you'll always have a load of shepherds and shepherdesses in their dressing gowns with tea towels on their head looking great. You'll get a load of angels and stars and things like that. And you'll get other classic nativity characters like the odd dinosaur or an elf or Santa. Everyone sort of makes their way into a nativity play. But I always think the people who have it hard in a nativity play, the people you really need to rely upon, right, are Mary and Joseph. I kind of feel like you've got to pick your two very best kids to play Mary and Joseph because they've got to be reliable, haven't they? You've got to know that Mary and Joseph are going to do things right when they get their moment to shine. You know, you've got to know that Mary isn't going to drag baby Jesus along the floor by his arms sort of thing. You've got to know that Joseph isn't going to entirely freak out when he's told he's got to hold Mary's hand. These are all the sorts of things you've got to deal with if you're Mary and Joseph in the nativity. And so here are my friends. They're at this nativity play. Mary and Joseph have done exactly what they want to. In fact, everyone's done exactly what they want to. Even the dinosaurs have been pretty good in this nativity play. And then it gets to the end of the nativity, and the guy running the thing, he stands up and he says, "That's it for today. There's going to be cake served at the back now." So what happens next? What do you think at that moment the obedient and well-behaved and reliable Mary and Joseph decide that they're going to do? Do you think Mary and Joseph stand there very obediently and they let everyone else go and get their cakes first? Do you think Mary and Joseph have actually turned into entire divas in the time that they've been up the front and they want somebody else to bring cakes to them? Or are Mary and Joseph just particularly well trained? Are they going to stand there and just wait for their next instruction to be given? Well, unfortunately, I don't actually have a clip I can show you, but thankfully, my friend was quick enough to get a photo of what happened next, which I hope is going to come up on the screens right about now. This is not what happened next. That is what happened next. You know, to be honest, it was never a contest really, was it? I mean, between the little baby Jesus and the cakes were always going to win, and Jesus ended up flat on his face, not even back in the manger. You know, don't you sort of love the way that kids have just got no inhibitions? They do and say the sorts of things that we might do and say ourselves, but as we get older, we become far too embarrassed to actually do them. And I sort of think, actually, if any of us were in their position, most of us would probably have done what the kids did, right? Jesus is the one we leave behind, and we just want to go and have the cakes. The cakes look good, we enjoy them, they're real, we know that they're going to be good. Whereas for so many of us, I'm sure in this room, Jesus is just a part of a Christmas story that maybe just seems made up to us. Maybe it just seems like it's a children's story, and certainly probably doesn't feel like it has any bearing upon our lives. You know, what if the point of the story of Jesus is that he has actually come to give us something that is also real and attractive and looks good that we might want? What if Jesus hasn't actually come to simply be an irrelevance to us or to be part of a funny Christmas story, but actually to give us something, to come into our burnt out lives, our overstressed days, and to bring us relief, to give us something? Because, in those readings that we've heard, and particularly that last reading that Oge just read for us from John's Gospel, the writer of that Gospel, John, seems to think so, that Jesus has something to offer you and me. Because as John was writing there, he doesn't actually tell us anything about the nativity story itself. John wasn't interested in telling us how Jesus came into the world. John wanted us to know why Jesus came into the world. And there was one verse that Oge read. It's on the handouts that we've got in front of us, on the back of them if you want to follow it along. It's in verse 9. John says that the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. You see, that Jesus was not born to just be a kid's story at Christmas, but that Jesus was born to be the light to the world, a light that shines in the darkness, the true light, an authentic light. It's not like flicking a match in a darkened room and where you watch it just extinguish before your eyes. Jesus came to be a light that would never fade and never extinguish. And in fact, this verse says that he came to be light for everyone who would receive him. Jesus has come to be light for you and for me. I was really struck the other day just reading an article that was published about this time last year where some notable figures were asked what gave them hope as they looked into 2023. And world leaders like Volodymyr Zelensky, he said it was the Ukrainian people. Rishi Sunak said it was the British people. Cambridge University's Mary Beard, she said it was her grandchildren. Michael Caine, the actor, said the same thing. Melinda Gates said it was a person. So often this is what we do, right? When we look for hope, we look to people. And we say they are going to be the ones who are going to give us something to look forward to in the future. And yet, sadly, we sit a year on from that article, and where people might have done lots of good things, people are often the same ones who have let us down. Because actually it is people who have done horrible things to one another throughout the last year. It is people who fill our news feeds with darkness and pain. It was almost 40 years ago that Band Aid released their Christmas song, Do They Know It's Christmas? And some of the lyrics in that song, I think, were as the same today as they were back then. They said at Christmas time it's hard, but when you're having fun, there's a world outside your window, and it's a world of dread and fear. And doesn't the world so often feel like that? Like it's a place of dread and fear? But it's not just dread and fear that's happening out there, but dread and fear that's happening in here as well, inside of us. How many of us, maybe even in this room tonight, are feeling fear about our jobs that we just don't know where they're going or how long they're going to be secure for? Or maybe feeling fear because we know that we're just one missed paycheck away from not being able to afford our rent, or we're one interest rate rise away from not being able to pay for our mortgage. Or we worry about difficult relationships within our families or within our friendship groups. Or we're concerned about aging parents and how we're going to be able to care for them. Or you're worried about your children and whether they're going to have a good time in life and what they're going to grow up to be like. There's so often all of these anxieties and worries that crowd in and cripple us day to day. And John says Jesus has come to bring light into that darkness. Jesus has come to shine his light into your life and into mine. Not just to be a children's story at Christmas, but to bring us light. The true light that gives light to everyone, John says, was coming into the world. And even though that is the case, still so many of us here tonight still miss that same Jesus. John goes on from verse 9 to say he, Jesus, was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. John is saying here that Jesus came into the world that he had made. Jesus came to the people that he himself had formed, and those very same people didn't even recognize him. Jesus walked their streets, he touched them, they ate meals with him, and they didn't even see who he was. They just thought he was some other guy. And the same thing happens today with us, right? We don't think Jesus really matters. We don't think he is who John is telling us he is, the one who came down into the world that he had made. And you see, for us to miss Jesus is not something that is actually just entirely neutral. It's something that has really significant consequences, and there's two reasons why, I think. The first one is actually slightly hard to hear. I think it's really consequential if we miss Jesus, because I think it's actually really offensive if we do so. Right, if Jesus is the maker of the world, and if Jesus has stepped down into the world that he has made, and we have paid no attention to him whatsoever, then that's likely got to be pretty offensive, right? I remember about 10 years or so ago, the Vatican decided that they wanted to try and promote more interfaith dialogue. And so they came up with a pretty left field idea for how they were going to do this. They decided they were going to start a cricket team, and they were going to send that cricket team on tour to different countries in the world to try and promote interfaith dialogue. This happened for the first time in 2014. They got like a papal blessing. They actually met the Pope before they went on tour. And their first tour was going to be to the UK, and some British news organisations picked it up. They were going to tour under the name of St. Peter's Cricket Club after St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Now, at the time, I just happened to be living in Brighton and playing for a cricket club with no religious affiliation, but happened to be called St. Peter's Cricket Club as well. And so we had an idea. We thought, seeing as this has got a bit of press attention, maybe we could write to St. Peter's Cricket Club in the Vatican in Rome and say, when you come on your tour to play certain members of the royal household and military 11s, really prestigious things, how do you fancy coming to our little cricket club in Brighton and playing against a team with the same name as you? And our chairman decided that maybe the best way to sell it to St. Peter's in the Vatican was to say, given that you want to have interfaith dialogue, Brighton is one of the most atheistic cities you could want to come to. So it's a great place for you to be. Now, I've no idea whether our chairman made that up or whether there was any truth to it at all, but the Vatican bought it, and they said, yeah, okay, we'll come and play your little cricket team in Brighton. And so we knew this was going to be something we would need to pull out all the stops for. So we worked really hard to advertise this event. We got a crowd in to come and watch. We got like food stands and drink stands. We even had a little commemorative plaque made for them so they would remember the occasion. We then had a really hard discussion where we decided that basically the away team dressing rooms were just far too disgraceful to let the Vatican team go into them. So we said, we'll have to give them the home team dressing room and we'll use the away team one. And then it sort of went bad when we turned up and we were all just looking fairly normal, and the Vatican team turned up in an expensive-looking bus and came out wearing blazers and trousers. And then we found out that the head of their sort of delegation was actually the Australian ambassador, and you had to address him in a certain particular way. And probably the most crazy thing about all of this was the fact that we went to all of this effort, put in all of these hours, spent all of this money, and they were rubbish. We'd beat them really easily. But, it's just sort of the thing you do, right? When you kind of think there are some reasonably important people coming to town, you say, well, we're going to make an effort. We're going to have an important day out. We're going to change the way that we do things. We'll change the way we speak. We'll change the way we dress. We'll change the way we behave. And so doesn't it make complete sense that it might be offensive that if Jesus Christ stepped down to the world that he has made and we have not batted an eyelid, that would be offensive? That Jesus Christ came to his people who should have known him, and we have not paid him any attention at all. For so many of us in this room, today might be the only time we hear the name of Jesus or think about the name of Jesus in the whole year. But if Jesus is who John says he is, the Maker stepped down from heaven into his world, then surely it is offensive and rude to ignore him. But it's more than just that, you see. Because it is not only offensive and rude to miss Jesus, but the second reason why I think it's really consequential to miss Jesus is because it's actually entirely tragic to do so. You know, I don't know what you think about God. I don't know whether you believe in God at all. But I reckon if there was a God and you wanted to design what that God could look like, you wouldn't even be able to get anywhere close to how great Jesus actually is. You know, the maker of the world, and yet what we're being told here is that he was humble enough to come down as a poor, defenseless baby, born a refugee. The maker of the world, yet he didn't come down to his world in power to assert his power authority over people. Jesus didn't come to exploit his power or to make people do what he wanted them to. Jesus came and stepped down and emptied himself of all power. And throughout his life, Jesus was known for spending time with the vulnerable, the marginalized, the weak, the outcasts. Jesus went to the sort of people that we still as societies tend to reject and cast out. Jesus spent time with the ones that nobody else wanted to spend time with. Jesus was a magnet to people who were hurting and who were broken. Jesus cares far more about justice and injustice than we ever could. Jesus feels more pain at the sight of war than we would ever feel. Jesus is exactly the sort of God that you would want there to be if there is a God. And so it is entirely tragic to miss him. He is the light who has come into the world, the light to shine into our darkness and the darkness of our world. It's tragic to miss him. But you see, it's not just what you miss when you don't see Jesus. It's also about what you gain when you do. John finishes this little thought that he's been having in verse 12 by saying, "Yet to all who did receive him," that's Jesus, "to those who believed in his name, Jesus gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God." You know, we might have any number of ideas in our heads here tonight about what it means to be a Christian or what Christianity is all about. But John is really clear here that being a Christian is nothing to do with the family you are born into or the family you weren't born into. Heritage plays no part in it. John makes it really clear that it is nothing about what we ourselves do. There is no human decision in this. It's not like taking Jesus up as a hobby or saying, I'm just going to start going to church, or having him like any other New Year's resolution I might set. John says the defining marker of what makes a Christian is someone who has been born of God, someone who has been adopted into God's family. And you know who it is who gives that right? It is Jesus, the one who has come down. You see, when we leave Jesus in the manger, or when we leave him even sitting beside the manger, we miss the opportunity to become children of God, to miss out on that status, that privilege of being a child of the one who made the world. And yet John tells us here that all we have to do, the way that we can make that reality for us, is not through our own efforts or skill, but simply by receiving Jesus. That is the very words John used. He said, "To those who did receive him." All we have got to do is receive Jesus. It is nothing about us or any work on our part. We just have to receive him. To receive Jesus means to recognize him as the light who has come into the world, as the maker who has stepped down into history, as its king. to recognize him as the one who has come to give us something at Christmas, something beyond any price you could pay. And you see, Jesus' light has started something. You see, for everyone who receives Jesus' light now, what it doesn't necessarily mean is that all of your circumstances in life are going to change right away. For everyone who receives Jesus now, it doesn't even necessarily mean that the darkness outside is going to change. But for everybody who receives Jesus, what he promises when he makes you a child of God is absolute transformation like you wouldn't believe. You know, one of the most famous stories at Christmas time, it's got to be Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, right? And in that, Scrooge is the absolute embodiment of darkness. In fact, we're told at one point that darkness is cheap, and that is why Scrooge liked it. Dickens tells us about Scrooge that he carried his own low temperature always about with him. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. Scrooge was miserable, cruel, cold, didn't care about anyone or anything but himself. And then Scrooge gets a visit by the three ghosts, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come. And then Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning. And the thing is, when Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning, nothing about the world outside has actually changed. You know, Tiny Tim is still unwell. Bob Cratchit and his family still don't have any money. These things haven't changed. But what has changed when Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning is Scrooge himself. Scrooge has been utterly transformed. It is not that he has decided, I'm going to start liking Christmas now. It's not that he decides, I'm going to start being kind to other people now. It's that something happened to Scrooge that completely changes his life, that makes him a completely new person, that means he can never go back to being who he was before because he has been changed. And you see, when you receive Jesus Christ, that is the change that he wants to bring to you. Not one where necessarily our circumstances or the darkness of life will always change, but one where the transformation and change that will happen within will be so radical that we can't even comprehend it. Where Jesus' light will shine in our lives and give a new meaning and purpose and a new outlook on life. You see, Jesus was not born to be a children's story, to be a baby who was just in a manger, but he was born to bring that light to you and to me. And so to have that light at Christmas, all you have to do is receive Jesus. Don't leave him in the manger, because he came down to give his light to you and to make you a child of God. That is what can be yours if you receive him. Not another burden for you, not another problem for you, but light and life for you and for me. So don't ignore him. Don't reject him. Receive him and receive his light and his life.